Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to Beacon in the Storm. I'm your host, Dr. Bradford Stormrider Carlson. Today, I have a very special guest with us. I have Mateo Portelli. How's it going, Mateo?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me on.
Absolutely. Let me introduce you first, and then we're going to kind of get into this. All right. So,
Yep.
Mateo is a first generation university student, U.S. soldier, political operative, and technology enthusiast. He was born in Toronto, Canada, but grew up in Las Vegas, Nevada, where he currently lives, right there with you. Mateo studies history at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, UNLV. So that's a mouthful. So it's going to be UNLV from now on.
It's a long title.
Right? He's going for a minor in military science and serves as a member of the UNLV Student Technology Advisory Committee. His career experience thus far includes an internship as the Geographic Information Systems Analyst with the City of Las Vegas and supporting the Nevada National Guard as an IT specialist while enlisted in the United States Army. Thank you for your service.
I appreciate that.
In addition to his studies in military service, Mateo is also currently employed as a client success representative for Trail Mapper, a national political fundraising organization. Mateo actively participates in civic engagement initiatives by volunteering his time and talents through grassroots organizing, leadership development, and creating educational content related to politics. In 2022, at the age of 20, so he's still young, Mateo is the National Republican Senatorial Committee's Nevada State Director of Operations, VAMOS, the largest Hispanic outreach field program in the history of the Nevada Republican Party. He's the founder and president of the UNLV College Republicans and chief operating officer of UNLV RebelSat, which will be operating the first Nevadan satellite in orbit by fall 2024. When Mateo isn't working or studying, he enjoys reading books, playing video games, engaging in political discussions, and spending time with family and friends. He's also an active member of the Knights of Columbus. And after he graduates UNLV in 2025, Mateo plans to commission as an Army signal officer and attend law school thereafter. All right, Mateo, thank you so much for joining us today.
No, I'm really thankful for being on here. Yeah, I do a lot. It's maybe too much.
It's all right when people are like, "Oh, tell me about yourself, Bradford." I have a half-hour story. And
Right,
it's carefully
right.
crafted over years of having to
Yeah,
tell this, and you have to make sure this detail is there in order to understand. Like, I get it.
yeah, yeah. I'm a
So
firm believer that everybody has a half-hour story. They just sometimes need help, compartmentalizing it. But everybody's
absolutely.
got a pretty good history.
See, if people would read Joseph Campbell's the Hero with a Thousand Faces, I believe it's called.
Mm.
It talks about the hero's journey. It
Hmm.
tells you how to tell a good story
Right,
that people
right,
will engage with.
right. Yep, that's true.
So, you're back in Las Vegas now. You just got back, right? So, how does it feel to have the Knights win?
Oh, it was amazing. I'm sad that I wasn't in Vegas when the final game against the Panthers, but it's historic. I mean, yeah, nothing I say will be unique. There's been pundits and stories all about it, but I mean, the Golden Knights really revived whatever culture existed in Vegas, especially after, the October 1 shooting in 2017. So since that time, the Golden Knights really brought the city together, and it's very difficult to go drive any street and not see somebody has, a Golden Knights decal or a flag somewhere. So it's pretty awesome.
It is literally everywhere. I've lived all kinds of places, and originally from the Bay Area in California. So
Mm,
you'd see A signs, you'd see Niners
right.
stuff, Raiders stuff, but here it's like you can't swing a
Yep.
cat without hitting a
Yep.
Knights fan.
Yep. It's true.
So Mateo, I'd like in your own words,
Mm,
because you and I have talked before. The
mhm,
point of this show is to kind of put a spotlight on men's issues. So I want to know
mhm.
why are you willing to come on the show today and talk to me about these issues, knowing full well that this is
Yeah.
kind of a hot subject?
Yeah, yeah. Well, the simple answer might just be because I'm a man, and I think it's important for young people, or any people, to identify the issues in their life and try with courage to see if we can discuss about solutions, right? So, I mean, I grew up doing speech and debate and mock trial and a lot of like speaking stuff throughout high school, and even in college I did some mock trial, and obviously working in politics, that whole game of politics is just talking and persuasion. So I've had a very unique perspective of listening to other people's issues, and then trying to work with them to solve them. And one thing that I've just noticed, growing up, is there are a lot of resources for like mental health, and that's very good. Our culture, certainly the Army, is evolving to promote resiliency. But when it comes to discussions about masculinity or manhood, I just see a vacancy in building up young men. So if I could be of service to help foster these discussions, I'd like to be.
I appreciate that. And I'm a huge supporter of the armed forces. I'm a huge supporter of veterans. I founded a nonprofit here in Nevada for disabled veterans. And it was interesting to me because you hear that the 22 a day stat, right? 22 veterans a day commit suicide. And as I started getting into looking at men's issues, it's a man every 13 minutes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but that's a much bigger number. Like, why aren't we talking about this? Where is the focus on men's issues? Now, you mentioned that you came on because you're a man. So let me ask you, what does it mean to be a man?
Yeah, it's a great question. And certainly nowadays, a lot of people have different answers for that, I suppose. For me, it's important to know not just the biological differences, right, and perhaps temperamental issues between both men and women, but more specifically, how do we interact with other people, right? So only men can be fathers and brothers and husbands, right? So everything we do in our life is relational. So when I speak to other young guys about growing up, right, Knights of Columbus is a very conservative Catholic, effectively it's fraternity. I'm usually one of the few guys in there who doesn't have a wife and doesn't have kids, but I'm learning from a lot of these husbands and fathers. So what does it mean to be a man is someone who is in those relationships, right? In relationship with whether it's siblings or parents or children, and is able to, this might be kind of hoity-toity, but contend with the world around them. And it's not to say that women can't either. Every person has to contend with the world around them. But I think that certainly in a Christian mindset, which is what I have, we see throughout history, throughout both biblical history, but then of course in the 20th century, men willing to stand up in the face of depression, of war, of really bad issues, and say, I'm going to spend my time and possibly my life trying to fix this. And that's pretty empowering. So
I want to point out, because you kind of hedged a little bit. You said, well, women do that too. But the last point you just made, that sacrifice. Well, there are plenty of women have sacrificed. There are women in the armed forces. And so, like, I guess what I'm really kind of getting at here is you're kind of hedging around a stereotype, right? Some idea of what it is, but you're having a little bit of an issue kind of defining that, but you know it exists.
Sure.
Right. So it's not that were you raised a certain way? Were you told, and then we had this conversation by email that you were a little concerned because 10 years ago you were 11. But you were raised to understand what it means to be a boy, what it means to be to be a man, right?
Yeah, I grew up, as most American. I grew up in the United States. I grew up in Las Vegas, even though I was born in Canada, and so I grew up playing with other kids, and you sort of had these sort of gender norms growing up, and boys will usually play in a lot more sports, or just perhaps they may play army more often than the girls and stuff. So I kind of grew up with that gender normative perspective, but especially nowadays, we live in a very egalitarian society, right? I mean, certainly if you compare to a lot of Latin American countries, certainly, just other continents, we live in an extremely equalized society. So the cultural impositions that I may have been taught, right, whether it's Christian background or conservative, whatever, those aren't as important to me as, like I said, the relational differences, because people, like I said, exist in relationships. So just growing up, right, whether I've been dating and just learning, hold the door open, right, pay for dinner, stuff like that, those sorts of social habits, to me seem pretty productive. And so whatever I can do to help the people around me is the goal. I mentioned, sacrificing courage and whatnot. You're absolutely right. I mean, I know, if this language is okay, I know some badass women in the Army, and I know some pretty outstanding women in my life as well. So by no means is anything really exclusive, other than frankly the biological and just gender relational titles in terms of men and women. But you're right. I think there is that stereotype that exists, and I wonder. I don't have the answer, but I wonder to what degree we can have that conversation as a culture about whether we should keep those stereotypes, whether there are benefits to those stereotypes, or whether we should continue to push towards egalitarianism and drop it off.
Certainly. It's interesting you bring that up, because it's every single day I'll get somebody hating on a video that I put out where I'm saying, hey, men have issues. Maybe we should have a conversation about that. That's essentially all I'm saying. For sure. I'm being told men need to shut up, that they need to be quiet, that they need to learn their place, that I've been called an insult. I've been told I have a tiny package.
Sure,
I've been
sure.
all these horrible insults. And why do you think it's so toxic to have a conversation about this? Like, is it that society has decided that men don't have issues and we just have to like come to terms with it, or what?
I'm not convinced that there's this giant like cabal or conspiracy necessarily to keep, because that would take a lot of energy and money and manpower, unintended, I suppose. But I do think that anybody who's willing to throw slurs and ad hominems, because I did debate for a long time, so I kind of know some of these rules and sort of the psychology that goes into how angry does someone need to get before they start insulting someone. So I don't think it's orchestrated. I do think though that there is this kind of undercurrent of an agenda. It might be, for example, it might be that if you raise the issue of male resiliency and suicide and all these issues, right? Well, obviously, spending time on that issue means that you're not spending time on female suicide, right? Which is also an issue, certainly in the West, right? If you want to compare it to other cultures in the world. So there's a limited amount of time and resources that we can spend on certain issues. That's why we have specialization. That's why I think discussions like this are so important, because other people should have other discussions too. And then your audience and your listeners can choose who they want to listen to. But I think when you spend time on issues that are gendered, then people who look at the world in a very polarized way might get upset that you're not looking at it their way, So I certainly don't have an answer for why someone would be so rude. I've had a lot of difficult conversations working in politics. I've had plenty of difficult conversations, and I've certainly been attacked plenty of times for being Hispanic, for being a young conservative, and all the like. But I mean, my advice is to just keep having the conversations and to do so with dignity and respect, and to say in this sort of discussion, hey, those are real issues too. The emotions probably are valid. But whoever is slurring and throwing the insults, probably not the person to dialogue with that day.
Do you think this might be a civics issue? So I used to be an attorney, and in law school, my thing was the First Amendment. So I wrote my law review paper on the First Amendment. I took all the First Amendment classes. When I was in election law, the question came up: are lies considered First Amendment protected? And my belief is I'm a First Amendment purist. So long as it's not an actual crime, like it says no law, right?
Right.
Do you think it's a matter of people not understanding what it means to be an American, what the First Amendment is supposed to be, and is more they just want to impose?
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of pointing to a question that I've been asking a lot of my conservative peers, and I've got plenty of progressive friends at UNLV too, so I ask this of a lot of people. What is the culture of America, right? As somebody who wasn't born in the country but grew up here. My mother was naturalized in Nevada, as a citizen. And I know non-citizens. I know plenty of non-citizens. I know people who, undocumented is a term that's often used in immigration discussions. So, but we all live in the same place, and for the most part, we speak the same language, and we like going to the movies, right? So there's this weird duality of like legally, there's a lot of differences in different types of Americans, and yet we all live here. And I think that in the absence of a solid social fabric, to say, hey, we may disagree on politics, but at least we both love going to Golden Knights games, right? Without that social fabric, it becomes a lot easier to attack somebody else. In the Army, obviously, when I have the uniform on, your political party doesn't matter. It's just the reality, because I've voluntarily chosen to submit myself to my commander-in-chief and to the law and to my commanders to execute whatever mission is at hand. So in uniform, politics don't matter. But in uniform, you still have a First Amendment. Right. It's not absolute, obviously, because you can't say everything you want, obviously. There's decorum and there's professionalism and whatnot. But on off time, of course, soldiers talk about different issues, and I mean, we're human, right? So politics sometimes comes up, and it's always respectful. I've never had a negative experience ever that I can remember in the 3 years that I've been in. But to your point, talking with another soldier about these issues, there is that unanimity between us. Like, well, we're both soldiers. Hey, we gotta wake up in 5 hours to go. Like there's that. But in the absence of that, that's where you get into some difficult discussion. So maybe it's a civics issue, but I think it is cultural. I think like the only people you really argue with are people with whom you have nothing in common. So.
Okay, so you mentioned social fabric, and I like that point that you just made right there. So are you saying that we just need to like literally come together
Mm.
physically more often?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that I think that the lockdowns and shutdowns that came as a result of COVID-19 was some of the worst political moves, and I mean political in the legal context, were the worst policy decisions, certainly for my generation, bar none. I can't think of anything that has been at that scale as awful as keeping, whether it's families apart, shutting down schools, obviously churches being illegally shut down, as we now know. I can't think of anything worse than keeping humans, which are human, we're social creatures, apart, because it disrupts our ability to see past the surface level. And I mean surface level, not to denigrate the importance of discussions and differences, but it is surface level to say, well, you're voting for this person, so I don't like you, right? Because if you can't see who they are as a person and their hopes and their dreams and their fears, if you can't go to Golden Knights games with somebody, or whatever it is, you can't go to church with somebody, and you forget, hey, we have similarities, then, like I said, it becomes a lot easier to hate on them. So yeah, I think being socially apart, physically apart, it's a very bad strategy to bring a nation together.
Okay, so where is this happening though? Like,
Mm,
humans are a mass of habits, right? Most activity
sure.
that we do is habit based, which means we had to have learned this somewhere in the past.
Hmm.
Is this an educational issue? Are the schools failing our boys? I mean, we see boys
Yeah,
drop
yeah,
out
yeah.
at a rate 50% more than
Correct.
girls. They enter college at lower rates than women, and
Correct.
have for the past 40 years.
Yeah.
Like, where is this caused?
So, and I'm not a psychologist, so I'll temper
I
whatever
just
answer
want
I
your
give
opinion,
you.
right? We're
Yeah,
just
for
two
sure,
two
for
guys
sure.
talking.
I will say that I do think that, and this is based off of like just other videos I've watched, and Jordan Peterson and a few other folks who know more than I do about some of these issues. Um, we know that young women mature much faster than young men, right? And so in elementary and grade school, and this is true just from anecdotal experience, it's more often than not that your young female students will just do better, right? Whether it's just in studying or knowledge acquisition, whatever, or presentation and decorum, giving speeches and whatnot. They just may do better than young men and young boys who might be more rowdy or just more interested in different things. I think that the education system is a misnomer. I don't think there exists an education system. In a federal republic, we've got 50 different states, and then in Nevada, we have 17 different school districts. And then within that, you've got hundreds of thousands of middle and high school students in Clark County. So there's no education system. There are multiple systems, and there's this kind of current and flow, and top down, you hope that you can impose certain curriculum and expectations to benefit a certain education cohort. But it really does come down to the relationships with your peers and your educators. I was blessed to go to Bishop Gorman High School. It's a private Catholic school here in Las Vegas. And I had the privilege to go on religious retreats, but I also had the blessings to do multiple different extracurricular activities like speech and debate and mock trial. And so I voluntarily subjected myself to really intense discussions. And our senior retreat, we went to it was a religious kind of prayerful thing for a few days. I wasn't even Catholic at the time. But I get to dialogue with other young men and young women about really intense, social and metaphysical issues, just stuff that I don't think normally happens nowadays. If you fast forward to sort of my sister growing up, and she's 18 now, but elsewhere in Clark County, I've got a bunch of friends who went through the Clark County school district system, and other friends who went through different private schools. Um, and you don't really have that culture of, hey, let's go on a retreat. And fair enough, separation of church and state, right? You don't want the public schools sponsoring necessarily kids going on religious retreats, but it's a rare day that I've seen kids take a step back from school for a week or less than a week, could be 4 or 3 days, and say, hey, for this block of time, we're going to talk about issues that matter to us, or we're just going to talk about our relationship with our families. It's something like one for every 3,000 students, the ratio of something like that, of licensed counselors for our high schoolers in Clark County. So institutionally, you don't have enough people who have the background to assist students with issues that matter a lot to them as they're growing up. But if we had more instances like that where kids could leave school and kind of have an adventure, because I think adventures matter, And I don't say that because the Army's been a heck of an adventure and a very big growth opportunity for me. But if that was more commonplace, I think that we would see young men and young people in general a little more grounded. Because if you're just in school, I mean, I know plenty of kids. When I was a youth attorney with the Clark County Law Foundation, I would work with at-risk youth and a lot of delinquency, first-time misdemeanor cases. So I would dialogue with the parents and kids who would, whether it's they fought at school, they ran from the cops, possessed marijuana or liquor illegally, whatever. And most of these kids, number one, they're good kids and they're smart kids by and large, but they don't have anything going on in their life. They don't do anything except school. So I think we need to get kids, boys more active too.
So it almost sounds like you're, again, making another civics argument.
Yeah, I mean, possibly, but I don't know, but I don't know the degree to which like school administrators are on the hook versus like our elected officials, right? Because it's a super complex issue.
Oh, sure, but I meant more so teaching our young people to be involved in the civic, with the body politic.
Absolutely. I heard in last January, what is it, 2023? Okay. So 2022 January, I went to this little forum to discuss education and especially special needs education and whatnot. And it was super educational for me. It's really cool. But I heard a description from some educator out in Utah who flew in to talk, and this man gave a definition for education, or schooling more specifically. Why do we send kids to school? And he asked people in the audience, and some people rose their hand. Oh, it's to, help the workforce. It's to, I think somebody said to civilize them, which is not a bad answer. Those are not bad answers. He said, which I love this answer. He said, the purpose of school is to create citizens. It's to create people who feel not a debt necessarily. I feel a debt, and that's a personal thing, but feel secure in their community. And in the context of our federal republic, I should have things in common with a Nevadan more than someone from Idaho, but I should have something more in common with someone from Idaho than someone from Mexico, right? So we're nested in this layer cake of community, and school, it did that for me because again, I did speech and debate, so I was talking about law and stuff, all these things, but it should do that. I would hope for everyone. It should build community, and I think you're right. I think civics is a part of that.
Okay. Change the subject for just a second.
Sure.
So I've been involved in both conservative politics. I've been involved in liberal politics. I've worked with various organizations. I've met all the different politicians on both sides. But what I have found is that when it comes to topics of equality, liberals try to say that they're the one, right? That they're the one who has the minorities. But why is it then that conservatives seem more receptive to male inequality issues?
Or are you talking about how, like, are you saying that conservatives are more comfortable talking about the 22 a day?
So here you're willing to talk to me, and you self-styled conservative, right?
Sure.
I have yet to have anybody who considers themselves liberal willing to even admit that men have an issue.
So got it. So I will tell you that I hope that changes soon, because I know plenty of my progressive and liberal friends who are willing to talk about men's mental health and all that. So I hope, and maybe I can refer you some people too. So I hope that changes soon. I do think that part of it may be, part of it may be religious, to be frank with you. It's not to say that all conservatives are religious. It's by no means the case. And on the flip side, plenty of progressives and liberals are religious too. But it may be, open up any standard American Bible. You're going to have the last couple verses of the first chapter of the first book talking about male and female, and he created them. Flip to the New Testament, you're going to have different instances of Jesus treating women in a manner that's never been treated before, right? The first evangelist in the New Testament, the woman at the well, was a woman, right? And you're going to have Paul in his letters talk about how husbands should treat their wives and vice versa. So in a religious context, there are multiple conversations about gender, and sometimes it's uncomfortable in a social context, of course, but it is the way it is. So that might be part of it. And as a conservative Christian, I like reading my Bible and I like going to church. So maybe I'm more attuned to those discussions. But I also think, and this kind of goes back to the very first thing that we were talking about, I do think that, again, if you're talking about men, then you're not talking about women. And you can talk about both at different times, but you can't do it at the same time. So in discussions with folks who like to be all about equality, which is not a bad thing. America is a very equal, very, like I said, it's a very egalitarian nation. Highlighting issues about men necessarily means you're not going to talk about women. And that might seem, to somebody who isn't used to discussion and dialogue and debate, that might seem like you don't want to talk about women, which isn't true. And that's why it's important to have discussion. The last thing I'll add on that kind of strain is social media is awful. It's a very bad tool to learn about what people feel. Or let me take that back. It's a great tool to learn how they feel, but not really how, excuse me, how they think, right? Because if I use Twitter, I use Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever. The function of a lot of these tools is to just get out information as quickly as possible. And we're predisposed to listen to the bad, for sure, but we're also predisposed to listen to what's easy. So headlines, and this is true for news media, but whatever is simple that I can digest and scrolling is ideal. Nuance is not marketable. And I think it's changing, with the Joe Rogan types and the rise of podcasts and shows like yours. I'm sure that I pray that happens, because we need nuance. We need people willing to say, I don't know, more often. But as long as young people, and whether they're progressive or whatever, use social media and use it regularly, they're going to be, like I said, accepting one stream, accepting the easy stuff, and not listening to the nuanced stuff.
I absolutely agree with you on that one. I've had people see my clips and then chew me out. And I said, did you see the full video?
Right.
The clip from the full video. And they went and they're like, oh, wow, this is actually a really deep topic.
Right.
Yeah, maybe.
Yep.
Maybe we've dug a little deeper than I browse Reddit, right? And Reddit's just literally nothing but headlines.
Correct.
Maybe go into the comments, but like people get their news that way, and they just get outrage after outrage because that's what gets clicks.
And I've been guilty of that too. I mean, I've done it too, of the easy, especially in a political context, like news clippings are a big deal, right? Because you need to know what the news is saying about either your candidate or your program or whatever, right? And so you're scanning, because there's only so many hours in the day. If I've got to knock, if I have to knock doors for 6 hours, I'm not going to spend 4 hours reading the news, obviously. And I might do both, and I definitely have sometimes, or I might tweet between doors. But it comes down to time. Time is a limited resource. And so, yeah, like I said, path of least resistance. People are going to do what's easy. I'm guilty of it too. But I think it is important to be aware that we're guilty of it, and then to have discussions like this, to have nuance.
Okay. Now, Mateo, in your experience, what has been effective in inspiring young men to take charge of their lives and do difficult things honorably?
Frankly, I would tell somebody to enlist in the military, but that's not, that's because they'll learn really quickly about hard work. But that's not realistic for everybody, of course. But the simple answer, especially when I talk to some kids, and I use kids jokingly because I consider myself a kid. When I talk to some young adults about purpose and kind of this sort of doomer culture that exists, especially a lot of young men gamers, I tell them to go to church, and that's about it. Or I tell them to go volunteer. Those can happen together, right? You can volunteer at Catholic charities, and you could do some religious related work, or you could whatever it is. But going to church and listening to super high level, the metaphysical is the term that comes to mind, right? Like this idea of worship beyond yourself is important. But then also the community that comes along with that is indispensable. It is indispensable. I mean, I went to church Sunday, saw 4 buddies of mine, and I'm just shaking their hands. We're just catching up. It is indispensable to have those sorts of relationships. That frankly, I mean, as you well know, church attendance is down, especially a young Generation Z. So that's what I would recommend to somebody who doesn't really know where to go for community or just that inspiration. Go to church, because I guarantee you your church needs help. And go to a church. If you never go to church, just Google. There's plenty of them. I'm partial to Catholicism, of course, but there's plenty of churches in Las Vegas. The second part of it would be volunteer. There are so many nonprofits. There are so many nonprofits in Nevada. We're such a small, quote unquote, state, 3 million or so residents. You could do anything you want. You could work with animals. You can work with veterans. You can work with the homeless. You can work at a battered women's shelter. You can, it doesn't matter. And that experience, number one, you'll feel better, right? Spending your time helping people is good for the soul. But number two, you will meet other volunteers, and then you will make friends, and you will learn about why they are volunteering. And as far as I can tell, any motivation, whether it's been in the military, whether it's been for school, whether it's been political, whatever, you are motivated by the people around you. Sometimes it's because it's in competition and you want to be better than them. I'm sure you may know that as an attorney, so, right? So sometimes it may be internal motivation. Sometimes it may be, hey, I love this person and I want them to do better, so I'm going to spend my time helping them. And then, of course, that lifts you up, right? But whatever the case is, go to church and or volunteer.
It's interesting just how much psychology is involved in a lot of what you're saying. That's just kind of the undercurrent of how people actually operate when you like break them down.
Sure.
Now you mentioned, the advice you're like would be join the military. Now, just on that note, the military is majority men. In the past 40 years, 60 years, 100 years, 99% of combat deaths and casualties have been men. And the military is taking efforts in order to diversify, right? But it's also a volunteer military. And we see this as well in, dangerous job positions where it's 95% men here, 96% men there. How do we incentivize women essentially to want these positions? Why does it seem like men are falling into these positions rather than choosing these positions?
So I don't, I would need more data for sure. I would love to know more data about different job positions and whatnot. I think that, number one, men and women are different, right? The reality is there are temperamental differences, right? There's a reason why we have more women who go into the medical field and the educational field, because there is that aspect of dealing with people in a mentoring way and helping them in a mentoring way versus almost every single Navy SEAL. I think there might be one, has been a man, because it's an extremely aggressive, like, you need those guys to be very good at killing, right? And operating in the worst scenarios like possible. Like, they need to be able to walk into hell. So I don't know that the answer is necessarily, well, we want 50-50, because women and men are not equal, but certainly biologically. They are in dignity. They are absolutely in dignity and value. And I would argue that everybody's infinite in value, but I don't admit that I want 50-50 across the board. What I do want is people willing to say, I'll try that, right? I have a cousin of mine, she just joined the Marines. Now, I told her, are you sure you want to join the Marines? I was like, hey, I'm partial to the Army. But she's like, no, I want to do it. And I'm like, great, then be the best Marine in your freaking platoon. Like, literally be the best, right? If you want to serve, do it. I did not come from an athletic background. I don't come really from a military background. My father's father was in the 101st Airborne. I never really met him. He died when I was very young. So me joining the military was a lot of, like, obviously the material benefits were there, but it was a lot of, let me just prove to myself that I can do it. And it sucked in the moment for sure. And then looking back, I'm like, I'd probably do it again. It was super fun. And I had a lot of women in my platoon as well, and they kicked ass as well. So again, it's not so much about equalization, because it's really more do what you want to do and then do very well at it, right? So identify in your life what would be difficult, but safe for the most part, unless you're fine with assuming risk, and then do it, right? One of my sergeants, my unit, obviously leadership changes, so she's no longer my direct supervisor, but she just signed up to be a correctional officer with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. That's huge because LVMPD needs officers, whether they're on the street or COs. And she's a woman, you know what I mean? Like, so we need people who are just willing to say yes. Gender matters a little less, but it does matter. And the diversity aspect you mentioned, I think more so isn't that they want to bring down the proportion of men or raise necessarily the proportion of women. I'm certain that some people believe that and want that, but I think more so it's just we need more people.
Yeah.
And if there are
down, they need more people.
100%. So if there are recruitment tactics we can take, if there are communities we can go to get more people, then that's what the Army is going to do. And the Army's been around before the United States was the United States. So I'm sure they'll be fine eventually, but.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right, Mateo, do you have anything else you want to say or any other thoughts you want to share with us before we close this out?
I really appreciate the offer to come on and just to share some of my thoughts. I would encourage, I'm curious to see the audience breakdown, right? Hopefully you're going to have more men tune in and listen to some of these discussions, but also just people in general looking to learn. Of those people who are looking to learn, if it's good to listen to discussions like that, you should, and keep coming and subscribe and share with your friends. But also talk to the men in your life. You know what I mean? Like, sit down with your father, sit down with your brother, and either do something with them, right? Go get a bite, go to the movies, or just talk. Because that is, for me, it's worked, but that's because I'm a talker. The reality is our culture doesn't really do that as much as it should. So that's what I would recommend. That's my advice, is just talk to the men in your life and talk to people in your life more. So
Absolutely. All right, Mateo, thank you so much for coming on with us today. I genuinely appreciate you being willing to share your thoughts, and especially on such a hot button topic.
Sure.
All right. Now, for everybody else, I'm going to remind you all, keep looking for the light in the tempest. God will show you the way.